to introduce Marc Peterson. He is the co-coordinator of Citizens Climate Lobby in Utah. And he is going to give us a 1/2 hour presentation, and then we'll go to discussion. And then Chris Cherniak will tell us the update on what's happening with COVID and with the drought in our local area. So that'll be the last 5 minutes. Marc, please go ahead and tell us how things are going in reducing the CO2 and why we should be encouraged. And let us see that very cool demo of the, what's it called, En-ROADS simulator. Thank you.
Right. Well,
you got it.
Okay, well, thank you, Jill. And thanks to the League of Women Voters for allowing Karen and I to do this discussion. I'm going to start sharing some charts, sharing my screen. We've got just a few charts to go over, and then we'll dive into the simulator and have fun and look at a lot of different scenarios coming from that. So if I share my screen, hopefully you're seeing my chart. Is everybody?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Let me get my notes in front of me so I don't get lost myself. So let me give you a little bit of background on me first. As Jill said, I'm Marc Peterson. I'm a co-Utah State coordinator along with Tom Moyer. I'm a member of the Salt Lake City Chapter Steering Committee of CCL. I'm retired. I spent 30 years in the electrical generation industry. I retired as an executive with GE. And sometimes I drift off and I can go deep in that area. Sometimes I do get deep, and that's part of what Karen's going to do. Once I go off into the weeds, she's going to slap me and pull me back and make sure I'm on topic. And with that, Karen, just little background on you.
Yeah, so I am part of the steering committee for Salt Lake City, and I also lead the Light Writers Group. And so we submit letters to the editor and op-eds, and then those also go to our representatives. I'm a retired pediatric nurse practitioner and started seeing a lot of health concerns for our children. So after I retired, I became interested in Citizens Climate Lobby, and now I've been doing this for 6 years.
Okay, and the title of this chart that I'm showing says Climate Change Optimism. And I was speaking with Jill just before things started, right? And there's lots of pessimism in climate change activities right now. So we're going to measure how well I do at the end of this discussion, this presentation. We're going to do a thumbs up or thumbs down. And I'm looking to see if anybody is more optimistic after the discussion than when we started, right? And we'll just do a pure thumbs up and thumbs down measurement. So going from there, next chart. So we're going to talk about the bad. Everybody has a good handle on the bad already. We're going to talk about the good. I think the good's going to be surprising. And we're going to talk about the hopeful, and the hopeful is going to come from En-ROADS. So let me start with the bad. This chart is just data, right? This isn't a forecast. It's not happening somewhere else. This is what's happened in Salt Lake County. I've got one for Summit County. Some of you folks are from there. Summit County is actually worse than this. But essentially, the average temperature since 1895 has increased 6.2 degrees Fahrenheit in Salt Lake County. I think it's 6.9 in Summit County. The average world temperature has increased 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So Salt Lake County and Summit County actually is a little bit more than this, but has the temperatures increased 2.7 times more than the global average. This isn't stuff that's happening somewhere else. As everybody knows, I watch the news and you see all the things that are going on, but this is happening here and it's a huge impact. And it's already happened. Okay, I don't want to overblow the bad here. This, though, is a picture of the Great Salt Lake, right? So in 1986, the lake was at a record high and covered approximately 2,300 square miles, contained 30 million acre feet of water. As everybody knows from watching the news or hearing the news, right, on July 3rd, the lake level dropped below its its October 2021 historic low level, and is now, actually it doesn't say how many gallons or acre feet. At any rate, so if you look at these pictures, it shows that, look, it's shrinking. And everybody, I'm sure, has heard all of the very bad things that can occur if we let it completely dry up. I'm not going to get into those now. Just saying the evidence that the results of that temperature increase is happening visually, so that we can visually look at it, right? Great Salt Lake, you can look at Jordanelle, you can look at Lake Mead, Lake Powell, any of those lakes. All of those are disaster discussions. Okay, that's the bad. Now we're going to get into the good part, all right? So this pie chart shows where the primary greenhouse gas emissions come from. This is a US chart. The world chart is pretty similar, just slightly different. But if you break this down into sectors, I think it says 28% comes from transportation. I think it says 26% comes from the electrical generation industry. You add those together, and that's over 50% of greenhouse emissions come from transportation and electrical generation. Okay. Oh, I forgot to say that if anybody has any comments that they want to make or questions that they want to ask, they don't want to wait till the end and keep it fresh, then just raise your hand or go off mute, just speak up or go into the chat. Karen's going to look at chat as well. We don't want anybody to forget things. All right, so the good, right? First, let's talk about transportation sector. Electric cars. So a couple of weeks ago, the US passed the 5% market adoption threshold. And what that means is that 5% of the market is now purchasing electric cars. Okay, in business theory, any new technology that hits 5% or more starts to take off on what is called an S-curve. And the S-curve has a rapid increase of market adoption until that market is so saturated, then it starts to level off and new technologies come on. And you can see in this chart that I've got, so this is on the left, right? If you look at the total world, it's starting to take off on that S-curve. So it's following traditional business. I wouldn't call it theory, I would just call it facts. That's what happens. Okay, then if you look at all of the automotive manufacturers in the world, all of them have plans to be totally electrified before 2050. Many have plans to be totally electrified by 2030, 2035. So there is no money left. That's where all the investment is going. There's no money left to put investments into combustion engine vehicles. So, and this starts to build on its own momentum, meaning as more electric vehicles are purchased, more electric, I'll call it charging stations are placed. And as the volume of combustion engine vehicles goes down, then gas stations can't support themselves because they're having less customers. And so it creates its own downward cycle. And if a great example of this was not the iPhone, well, it was the iPhone, but smartphone technology, right? We were all using landline phones. Smartphone technology came in, and 5 years later, we're all using cell phones and then smartphones. And the last 2 homes that I've lived in, we didn't even bother putting in landlines. So we just use smartphones. So one other point, and I'll move over to the right side. So part of the issue that folks have complained about, though, with electric vehicles is they're just too expensive. Nobody can afford them. It's not mass market. So let me read off some costs of, this is a 2022 Nissan Leaf, $28,895. 2022 Mini Cooper, $30,750. 2023 Chevrolet Bolt, $26,595. 2022 Mazda MX-30, $34,695. The mainstream cars are now hitting the market. And as those mainstream cars hit the market, it won't be an issue. It is not an issue with demand right now. It's an issue with supply. How fast can they be built? That's what will control the adoption rate, not demand. Demand will be there. Okay. Have I got anything else here? All right, let me go over to the right side. So we talked about the transportation sector, and that's already on target to be at or near zero CO2 emissions prior to 2050, at least from new vehicles. Old vehicles, it'll be tough to find gas. Okay, on the right side, the electrical generation industry. So let me just make a broad statement that, look, the transition to clean energy has begun and we're deep into it. So my first, let me move the notes a little bit so I can read it. It won't let me move those notes. Okay, I'll pull this to the side. Sorry. All right. Okay, so Pacificor, which services most of Utah, including Summit County and most areas in Utah, some areas it doesn't. All right. So in their move to clean energy, they're adding 9.2, this is wrong, this says megawatts. They're adding 9.2 gigawatts of wind and solar. And 6.1 or 6.2 close to gigawatts of storage. I've got to change that. So how big is a gigawatt? So what? So what's the big deal, right? So I've been retired for 6 years, but when I was retired, just the equipment for a gigawatt was around $1 billion. So Pacificor over the next 26 years, because they say they will be zero CO2 emissions by 2048. Okay, they're going to spend over $15 billion over the next 26 years to transition to clean energy. Okay, and if you roll that back and think about the pie chart before, right, what was the next biggest sector? Electrical generation. Did somebody have a question? No, okay.
I'm hearing music. Is someone else hearing music? Or is that me?
It's you.
I don't know where it's coming from.
Okay, it was you because you went on mute and now it's not, we can't hear it. So, all right, so Pacificor is not an aberration. All of the utilities in the West and really all of the utilities across the US have plans. They all have to create this. It's called an integrated resource plan. It's a long-term plan. It shows what they're going to buy, how they're going to do it, what their intentions are, right? And all of them have plans to either hit zero CO2 emissions prior to 2050, some as early as 2035, or there are still a few holdouts, not many, that are not specifying the date at which they hit zero-2 emissions. But let me say why this is occurring, right? So the why is it's not because of legislation, because legislation has not been passed. If we're looking for an area to be disappointed in, that's absolutely an area to be disappointed. It's because of public pressure, and in the case of electrical generation, it's capitalism. It's purely capitalism, in addition to public pressure. But the point there is, and I think I have, do I have that right? Clean energy has become the least cost source of energy. I don't expect you to be able to read these and everything. I've got this. This was just to remind me that, look, geothermal, which Utah has abundant resources for, and wind, which Utah has abundant resources for, and solar, which Utah has abundant resources for. This is a huge opportunity, but all of those technologies are the least cost source of energy. And if somebody's looking at hard trying to read that, then they want to push back and say, well, wait a minute, wind on shore is at $40.23. This is a gigawatt, no, a megawatt. And if you compare that with combined cycle is $39.94. This chart was put together before the latest price increases, right? First, I would say that that's close enough. And actually, it's close enough for all the utilities to move towards clean energy rather than fossil fuel energy. But that is before the latest 2022 natural gas price increases. So combined cycle is a natural gas fuel technology, and it would be much more expensive than that. So the economics are behind the move and transition to clean energy. And all of that is, all of their plans are to hit 0 CO2 emissions by 2050 or well before, depending on the utility and where you're looking in the US. Okay, any questions there? I'm gonna move on. Okay, we're gonna start looking at En-ROADS. So En-ROADS was developed by MIT about 12, 13 years ago, and by some professors there who were working, well, it was by some doctoral candidates who were working on a doctor's program. I want to call it a thesis, but it's more than that, whatever they call that. And it's been updated and improved ever since then. Some of those PhDs left, started this climate think tank called Climate Interactive out of out of North Carolina. We're going to dive in and look at that. Okay, so this is, anybody can look at it. I don't pay a subscription or anything. Actually, they encourage folks to look at it, play with it, and be trained on it. So real quickly, in the upper, so this is the dashboard. It makes it really easy to get around and look at different scenarios. But it can get really deep, really fast if you want to. We're obviously not, because we don't have the time to do that. But I've defaulted this chart to look at global sources of primary energy, right? And coal is brown, oil is red, gas is blue, renewables are green, got a little bit of bioenergy and a little bit of nuclear. All right, so look at that as we change things and look how the sources of energy change. On the right, this chart I had to go seek because I like this chart. It tells the story better for me, but this is temperature change, right? And it says if we do nothing, right? The base case scenario now is that the world temperature will increase 3.6 degrees C by 2021, which is the same as 6.5 degree Fahrenheit. Now, if you remember that chart that I showed just a bit ago that says Salt Lake County and Summit County are increasing at a rate 2.3 and 2.9, something like that, times more than the world average. That's a pretty nasty scenario if we don't address it. Okay, but we're going to. So what I'm going to show is the Citizens Climate Lobby approach, but I'm going to try and coordinate that into these things are already occurring, right? So again, Citizens Climate Lobby lobbies for legislation. No legislation has been passed, even though on over 50% of the sources of greenhouse gases, we're moving in the right direction. The right things are occurring. So I'm going to go into this. Well, I should have said, there's all these sliders. You can slide these things in all the different areas. Then there's these 3 menu buttons that you can go into and get deeper. I'm going to go get deeper into carbon price. CCL's approach was to start at $15 a ton, and that was going to start this year. Years to achieve the final, the initial price, we're going to say 1 there. Final carbon price, I'm going to say the final carbon price is $315 a ton, and that is because the CCL plan said we're going to raise it $10 a year for 30 years or so. Okay, years to achieve the final carbon price. I'm going to say 28 because that takes us to 2050 from now. Okay. Years to achieve the final carbon price, 20 years to start accumulating. This is what's wrong. 2022. There we go. Okay, there we go. All right, so it took it down, the expected temperature increase from 3.6 to 2.6 degrees C, or a full 0.1 degrees C. Didn't do enough, didn't solve the problem at all. So we have to do more, right? So what I'm going to look at next, and let's say most of this was sources of primary energy. I'm saying a good portion of that comes from electricity. All right, so we're going to electrify transportation. I already made the case that that's already moving in the right direction and probably can't be stopped right now. That's solid. We're going to electrify buildings and industry. There's a lot going on in that area, but there's not enough emphasis behind it, and we really need to do a lot more in moving our homes and commercial and industrial buildings to be electrified. So we've got a lot of work to do there. That's going to require some effort. Okay, that took us down to 2.3 degrees C. So then I'm going to dive into methane and other gases, and this is a couple of areas: agriculture, and then just leaks. So I'm going to turn on the detailed settings. So within agriculture, so a lot of this comes from beef cattle. A lot of it comes from farming. So I don't eat beef, but I don't expect everybody else not to eat beef. But if you feed the cattle, all you do is change their diet. You can create less methane gas. And then with regard to agriculture, and this won't be the result, or excuse me, the technology, the answer is there, and the answer is really fairly simple, but it will take some time to convince farmers to do something different than they have been doing for the last couple hundred years. But essentially that is so I grew up on a farm, right? And we would turn over the dirt, turn over whatever the crop was, expose everything under it, let it seep out over the winter, and then in the spring we would till it all down and make it all soft and then grow stuff. Well, it turns out that if you keep a cover crop and you just turn it over enough so that you can get new seeds in for whatever you're trying to grow, but you keep most of it covered, then you significantly reduce the CO2 releases. Okay, so technologies are there, the answers are there, we just need to move on to it. So energy and industry emissions, this is just leaks, right? And so this is going to require legislation, and we're just going to have to create some legislation that fixes the leaks and stops all of that loss of methane into the atmosphere. Now, so there's a good economic case for this too, right? Because every ounce of methane that leaks is lost product for whoever owns that facility, right? So there's a good economic reason to do it as well as an environmental reason to do it. But okay, so we did methane, that was a big one, right? So that's about all I can get out of there. So we've got the expected temperature rise to now hit what the Paris Climate Accord goals are, 2.0 degrees C. Okay, but 2.0 degrees C, so currently, if you look at 2022, temperatures increase 1.32 degrees, which means we've got another 0.7 or so degrees to increase before we can level it off. And that's not good enough for me. That means things are going to continue to get worse. So what's next? What else do you do? Well, the biggest impact, the biggest thing that we can change is take carbon out of the air, right? And this technology exists, and actually, so there's new stuff going on, but this is primarily the only way that we're going to reduce that to get to the 1.5 degrees C, which is, that's not the Paris Climate Accord target. That's the hope. That's kind of the best case scenario that most folks have given up on. So I did this discussion a week or so ago, and a person raised their hand and said, look, that technology does exist, and it's occurring in Iceland, but it's nowhere near effective. You can't suck in enough. It costs too much. And it would take the whole land mass of the world to build these factories and suck in enough carbon dioxide. Well, I think that whole land mass of the world is an exaggeration, a significant exaggeration. But in the last week since then, I've also read that a new technology is just being discussed where, so limestone, by its very nature, sucks in CO2 and holds it within that limestone. And this technology is, if you crush limestone and you sell it to farmers and spread it all over the ground, then it significantly increases the surface area mass that can suck in that CO2. And so it's a lot less expensive and a lot more effective than even building these facilities that suck in air and then capture the CO2 and sequester it. So that I'm not saying that this is simple and easy and it's already done. It's not. There's a lot of work that has to be done there. I'm saying that, look, it's feasible. Are we going to hit 2.0? I think there's a good shot that we can hit 2.0 because we're already moving in the right direction. Are we going to hit 1.5? That's probably a real stretch. Okay, any comments on this model before I move on to what's next?
I have a comment, Mark.
Yeah.
This is really cool to be able to change these variables. I like this a lot. But the time frame that everything is going to happen, that would, if we need to do this to make the emissions go down, is so long, so far in the future. That to me is discouraging.
It is. So it is. And actually, so usually when I do this En-ROADS, it's a lot longer discussion, but we've got more time, right? So the thing is, the time that it takes for things to happen is significant. So the issue with transportation, right? Because I want to talk about these two sectors. Well, it's not that we can't switch, it's how fast we can switch, right? And right now, it's all of the automotive manufacturers are racing with each other and competing with each other to see who can get the most competitive electric vehicles out the quickest. But it's going to be 2035, 2040 before they can get enough vehicles out to get to zero CO2 emissions. And then you've still got some on the road that we need to get rid of. When you look at electrical energy generation, it would be great. It would be fantastic if we could all jump up and down and make enough noise and pass legislation and force utilities to move to clean energy right now, but the resources don't exist. And it's going to take 20 years or more to build those resources. And so it is tragic that it's going to take that much time to make this transition, but the resources don't exist to do it overnight. It's going to take some time. Okay, any other questions there? I usually if we run out of, or if there's extra time, I'll come back and do some politically insensitive stuff and show some other things with regard to that. But all right, let's get back to the chart. So what should we do now? Right? What can we all do? What can we all do? Well, first, electrify everything. Electrify everything, because if you look at today, Pacific Core and Rocky Mountain Power, 70% of their electricity comes from fossil fuel activity, 60% comes from coal. Terrible. But they've got this transition plan that says it's going to be zero by 2040, 2048. And actually, I do subscriber solar with Rocky Mountain Power, which means 100% of the energy that I use gets offset by solar power in central Utah. And so there's more people can sign on to subscriber solar. They've got this Blue Sky program that helps them purchase and bring in more clean energy. There's stuff that we can do immediately there, but point is electrify everything. So my next point is lobby. Well, don't just lobby Congress, right? Because what's happened in transportation and electrical generation isn't because of legislation. It's because all of us have created public perception and public pressure for things to be different. So lobby everybody you know. Okay, and then the last thing is contact your member of Congress. And that's has always been primarily what Citizen Climate Lobby is about. And with that, I'm going to show you from Citizens Climate Lobby, if you're interested in doing that, how you can do it. You don't need to join us. But if you go to citizensclimatelobby.org, that's the URL, and then you go to take action, it'll give you several suggestions, either tweets or emails or calls or lots of ways to contact members of Congress. And then when you select one and you put in your address location, then it will give you ways right from there to contact those your specific members of Congress. And it will suggest things to say that are current, right? These are the things that are currently being negotiated and discussed in Congress. So call or text or whatever, contact and suggest this course of action. Okay. So this is some of the currently supported legislation that CCL supports. So CCL was primarily only a carbon fee and dividend. We've significantly evolved from there because that's been pretty hard to get past. We're still pushing really hard for that activity because it is the biggest single source or solution, has the biggest impact. But there's all these other acts that there are multiple supporters for. Well, the first one, carbon fee and dividend. Okay, there's 95 co-sponsors. That's a pretty tough putt, though, still. But growing climate solutions. This is encouraging farmers to do the right stuff. Romney and Curtis are co-sponsors. National Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Act. I'd have to go down and read it. Don't have time. Curtis is a sponsor. Save Our Sequoias. This is really about fire prevention stuff in forests. Curtis and Blake Moore have signed on to it. Then there's a Forest Act that says that prevents other countries from importing goods into the U.S. that were made from forests that they are deforestation, right? So it's destroying the CO2 capability of that. Enabling geothermal production on federal lands act. So currently, if you're going to do, it takes twice as long to permit a geothermal site than it does an oil well. Right, and geothermal is clean energy. So this is just trying to make it at least equal to oil wells. So what I also want to say here is, and if you go back to that chart where I was talking about PacifiCorp, there is a site in Delta, Utah, called ACES Delta, and it is the largest green hydrogen, which means it comes from water, not fossil fuels. It's the largest green hydrogen manufacturing and then distribution for gas turbines site in the world, and they are manufacturing the hydrogen from water that was going to the coal facility there, and it takes about half of what was going to the coal facility, nowhere near as much. Then they're sequestering that in the ground in salt domes, and then they're using it to run gas turbines, which those gas turbines starting at 10% hydrogen are going to slowly transition to 100% hydrogen or totally clean energy. It's the biggest site in the world doing that, and it's happening in central Utah right now. Okay. Oh, geothermal. So then there's a site just below that called Forge, F-O-R-G-E, where research is going on about geothermal. It used to be that you had to dig really deep and find the right spaces and find really hot place in the earth that could heat water. Then you pump it back up and you run a steam turbine. Well, this site in Utah is an experimental site involved with Utah State University, where they're finding out how you don't have to dig as deep. It doesn't have to be as hot, and you can still get the generation economically. And so it opens up a massive amount of area now that can be developed where it wasn't available before. And geothermal, unlike wind and solar, so wind and solar are intermittent resources. You can't control when the wind blows or the sun shines. Not that big of a deal for my 30 years in energy. It's not nearly as big a deal as everybody makes that, but still it's a deal. But this geothermal is on demand. You turn it up and down. And so it can provide the balance of wind and solar inexpensively. And the Heater Act, I can't remember what it was, but I've got notes below, but I'm running out of time. So how do you make an impact in Utah? Well, CCL has all of these different areas, and we have leads assigned to each of these areas. And if anybody's interested, email me I'll send you who to contact, and you can make an impact that way. All right, 2 final points, and I'll get out of here, or I'll be off.
You
We're
have,
already,
you have 3 questions, so you're not going to be out of there.
oh, okay, I won't get out of there. Let me get these 2 points, and I'll do those questions, right?
Okay.
Look, we're already experiencing the effects of climate change. Everybody knows that. Everybody sees that. I'm not so, I mean, that's terrible, but for us in Utah and the West, it creates an opportunity to, as we lobby friends, relatives, everybody we know, and members of Congress, they can't deny that the drought's occurring. They can't deny that the lake's drying up. They can't deny that all of the reservoirs are drying up, right? It's stuff you can't ignore. You just can't deny it. So it creates an opportunity for us to say, this is real, this is happening, this is us, we're in the center of it. Okay, climate change's future severity depends on our collective activity. It's up to you and me. It's up to us.
Yeah.
And with that, what's the question,
So,
Karen?
I'm going to read them backwards. How will green hydrogen be used, and what energy source can it replace?
So green, it can replace natural gas. And so green energy, so part of my history, I dealt with gas turbines. I did renewables the last part, but part of that was with gas turbines. Gas turbines have been able to be slightly modified to run on hydrogen for decades. I'd like to say it's not a big deal. They're really complicated pieces of technology, but it's known, right? It's known how to do that. So natural gas. Okay.
So you may have broached this answer to this with your geothermal, but you can add to it. Recently, I was without, Robin Frodge says, recently I was without electricity for 2 days. Could you address the risks involved with being totally dependent on electricity?
Yes. So that doesn't, that question, it doesn't matter where it comes from. Doesn't matter whether it's clean renewables or fossil fuel or whatever. When you're out of electricity, you're out of electricity. And if that's your only source of power, then it's a problem, right? But let me say a couple of things. First, so let's talk about cars. If you were out of electricity now, what are you going to do about your electric car? Well, if you're out of electricity now, the pumps aren't going to work at the gas stations either. So you're pretty much out of electricity. So if you want to resolve that, then you've got to put a storage facility in your home. But, so, however, electric cars, I guess, there are a few right now, but the future generations of electric cars, I'm looking at a 2024, what is this? Polestar 3, right? Has the ability to use its battery charge to power your house in the event you have a electricity shortage. So you can go out now and you can buy Tesla batteries or anybody else's batteries as a backup source to cover you while you're out. But 2024, plug in your car and you can run your house off of the car. Hopefully it'll last long enough, and hopefully the power will come back soon.
Yep.
When
the sun doesn't shine, the wind blows, and there's still geothermal, so we have pretty good coverage.
Jill, you're trying to say something.
Mark, I just wanted you to take your screen share down so we can see you again.
Okay, and if you need to cut me off.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Karen, was there one more question?
There's actually 2 more. Do you rank legislators according to climate votes?
No.
No.
And here's why.
We lobby everyone.
We lobby everybody, and we are nonpartisan strategically, and we lobby everyone. And if we only lobbied those that agreed with our position, we wouldn't be changing people's position, and we have changed legislators' positions.
And Lisa Rutherford says currently ESG, environmental social governance, is under review by the SEC to force corporations to consider ESG in their business models. how do you see this having a positive effect on climate change?
Yes, absolutely. It'll have a positive effect on climate change, and ESG goes beyond climate issues, right? It's social issues as well.
Mhm.
Those are occurring because of public people pressure on corporations. It's us, right? That's happening because we want businesses to tell us about their social governance so we can make investment decisions about whether we're going to support them or not.
Yeah,
Okay.
those are all great questions. Thank
They
you.
are. They're very good. Okay. Anything else? I've used my whole
Yes,
time. Okay, last thing.
Comments to the SEC are due in August. So if you want to make a comment to the SEC, we have to get on it. And we have a thank you, very informative.
All right,
Mark,
so I said we were going to do a thumbs up or thumbs down. I'm not
There's
going to make people do
one
that.
other question here from Norma.
Norma.
yeah, I was wondering, you were talking about electric vehicles, but what about trucks and trains and airplanes? I mean, that's still a large component of the transportation sector.
Yeah, if you broke that,
Yeah.
if you looked at that pie chart a little bit differently, it would show that air transportation is only at 3%. Still need to go after it, but it's significant. And you're absolutely right. We need to address those. So there are electric versions of everything that you said now. I'm not sure whether the electrification technology, batteries, will win that technology transformation, or whether it will be hydrogen, because hydrogen holds a much higher density of energy per space than batteries do today. Today's technology of batteries technology is evolving rapidly. So there are electric airplanes now, long way to go to do that. Most of the large airplanes are ran off of gas turbines, so they can run off of hydrogen. It's absolutely a slower transition in those areas than it has been in cars, but it's happening. It's moving in the right direction.
More questions?
I have a question, and it's very simple. Living here in Park City, we often can take the public transportation to events. I see very few people really taking advantage of this, even though we're encouraged always. We take it to the ski resorts, and it's interesting because so many people are coming from New York and Boston, where I lived previously. We didn't own cars, so we took public transportation, but they won't do it here. And the locals won't do it here. It's like demeaning to take public. What do you it's a simple solution.
So I roll that back to my second point of what everybody can do. Don't give up. Lobby everybody.
Yep.
Point it out. Keep suggesting that that's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. So that, I think that falls into my don't give up. Lobby everybody.
You could write a letter to the editor
That's what I was thinking, Zeta.
record and ask that question and talk about the advantages of it. And I wanted to say hello to Norma because Norma's written some letters to the editor.
With your help, Karen.
Oh,
Appreciate your help on those.
Hey, thanks very much for allowing us to go through this, and hopefully it was more optimistic than you expected.
Mark, we still have about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Because the last 5 minutes we need to turn over to Chris, but
Okay.
I was thinking about Europe and the cutoff with natural gas and how they were going to cope with that. And I'm worried about places drilling and getting more oil, and that sector actually increasing.
That's a great comment and great questions. And so the issue is we've got a short-term problem, meaning and we have to provide cooling and heating and resources until all of those resources can come from clean energy, right? And until the transition occurs. So Europe is trying as rapidly as they can to move towards clean energy resources, and some of that is not shutting down nuclear that they were talking about. Nuclear is a whole separate issue, but with regard to CO2, it's clean. And then they're begging Russia and other sources for natural gas to survive on until they can transition to clean energy. The issue of should we drill more, that's political smoke and mirrors. And the reason I say that is because no drilling today is going to impact supply in the next 1 or 2 years. So that's just political smoke and mirrors. How do you deal with political smoke and mirrors? Well, that's a discussion that is well beyond the topic of today.
Hey, Jill, if I can jump in and
Yes.
supplement Mark's response there, putting on my environmental engineer's hat. The majority of natural gas that's coming from Russia into Western Europe is used for producing electricity and heating homes, cooking, etc. The real concern is that with reduced amounts of gas coming from Russia to Western Europe, is that not so much more oil wells will be drilled in Europe or in the US, but there'll be a return to coal, reliance on coal to provide that electricity and to provide that heating. So very little oil is actually used to produce electricity anymore. It used to be back in the 60s and 70s, but oil is primarily used, as Mark says, for the transportation industry and for the chemical industry. You know, they make everything from our cosmetics to our pharmaceuticals to fertilizer, et cetera. So the real concern there is that fact that there's going to be a return to coal-fired power plants in the absence of natural gas. So I just wanted to make sure we understand those linkages and relationships between coal, oil, and natural gas and how that's used. Mark?
Yeah, let me add to that though. It's only a short-term stopgap solution. Nobody's talking about returning to coal for a long term.
Right. But
Just to cover until they can get clean energy.
exactly, because it's easy to convert those gas-powered generators, power plants back to coal, because they're all doing basically the same thing. But you're right, it's not a long-term response, but this is a stopgap measure that could happen.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
I have one more question. Bill Gates has a study going. Is it too complicated to explain in carbon emissions and turning it backwards? And
I'm familiar and I can talk about his nuclear ambitions. I am not familiar with, I mean, I read that headline and I didn't go any farther.
okay, sorry, thank you.
Okay, one last really quick one. Mark, do you think that President Biden will do something with executive action or some law that's already in effect to do something immediately?
Yes, and it won't make any difference.
Okay.
So the reason, let me give you my reasoning there. Executive actions, that's why Citizens Climate Lobby is very much favors legislative actions rather than executive actions. Executive actions can be changed by the next administration. And whatever executive actions he made, there will be lawsuits that will make it very difficult for those to be in effect. And so I'm not really hopeful in that regard, but at the same point, businesses are doing the right stuff. The needle's moving in the right direction. I am hopeful for all of those reasons. And I'm hopeful because my point there is that climate activists are winning that battle. Climate objectionists are losing the battle, but because no legislation has passed, they don't know it.
Mhm. Okay, Mark, are we a thumbs up or a thumbs down on becoming more optimistic? Here we
Can make
go.
Anybody more optimistic? All
I
right.
think some of us are. Okay, Chris Cherniak, can you kind of tell us what's happening in locally with COVID and our local drought stats?
Yeah, let's finish on a high note with talking about two of the most dire issues. I'll start with the drought. Actually, there is some good news with respect to the drought, but first, 100% of Wasatch County is in the extreme drought condition. This is according to the state website, droughtmonitor.unl.edu. It's a great website. It's updated every 10 days or so with respect to drought conditions. So this is where I get all this information. But 100% of Wasatch County is in extreme drought. Now, that's bad. It's not as bad as the worst conditions, which is exceptional drought. These are all very nuanced terms they use. So it's extreme. 50% of Summit County is in the extreme, but that's all on the west side of our county. So where we live, we are in extreme drought conditions. Not surprising though. But the east side of the county is a little better. It's only severe. Again, yeah. Phrasing, wordsmithing here. It's just not good. It's not unexpected. We are in the dry season. Now, what is good, two pieces of news, is that wildfires are actually not nearly as abundant or the same frequency as they were last year. We have not experienced in Utah the number of wildfires that we typically see. And that's because, honestly, because of better behavior by a lot of people, because most 80-some% of wildfires in the state are started by humans. So wildfires are down. And compared to last year, at this time, 100% of the entire state was in either an extreme or severe drought conditions. With respect to the entire state, at this time, only 84% of the entire state is either in an extreme or exceptional level. Again, that's still not good, but it's better than last year. We're seeing some rain, the monsoons are here, and so that's helping keep things the soil moisture content a little wetter than it was last year. Okay, so that's the drought update. With respect to the virus, what do I got? 2 minutes. Again, as I stated last month, don't rely on case numbers anymore that are reported from any county or any organizations. Those are unreliable, just to try to gauge how bad the virus is, because it's still here, and we even have the BA.5 subvariant is even more contagious than the Omicron variant, which was as contagious nearly as chickenpox. So it's not surprising if you're knowing a lot of people that are coming down with this virus. And so what you're really tracking is hospitalizations. And here in Summit County, I didn't get a chance to look at Wasatch County. Here in Summit County, hospitalizations still remain low or leveled off. The majority of those hospitalizations, not unsurprising, are either individuals that are unvaxxed or unboosted. Because now we're at the level where you really need to have been boosted once or even twice. So that's it. August, around the first week of August, the Summit County Department of Health will be updating its website. It's being revised. So look for that. And finally, Paxlovid, a really good drug. is now being, as I understand it, is being offered, or you can get Paxlovid from your pharmacist and not just your doctor. So that's a good drug to be using in the early stages of COVID if you catch the virus. That's it. Till next month.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Boom.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all very much for being here. See you next month. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.